Hello, dear students. The mother has asked me to keep going on here with these charts we have on René Descartes. And what I'm trying to do, first of all, is get at the heart of the matter. And I think that has to do with his starting philosophy all over. He's called, as we said before, the father of modern philosophy. So what I want to do today then is not yet talk about Descartes' books and his results and things like that, is to take a little bit further of the conversation that Mariano had with you about the ambiance, okay? So we'll review a little bit of what Descartes did at the beginning, but in order to see that, why he did that, why would he do such a thing, we need to talk about what it means, what is a disagreement, because remember it had to do with disagreement. And then we're going to talk about the most fundamental kinds of disagreements, because little disagreements or particular disagreements depend on general disagreements, I think, more fundamental disagreements. So let's review about what Descartes did, okay? Remember his argument. He had a pretty good argument. When was it, like the late 15th century, or sorry, 16th century, early 17th century. And as Mariano taught us, there was a time of decadence in philosophy, decadence in general, and people just wanted to start over. Okay, so he said that, Descartes, that he didn't have good teachers in university, and because they didn't teach him anything, he didn't learn. And he thought that the reason he didn't learn from his teachers is because their teachers weren't any good. That is to say, finally he thought that all of philosophy up to this point didn't do it right, okay? Because he thought, well, look, if one of the philosophers did it right, he would have had the truth, and the truth is appealing, and he would have been able to teach that truth to other people, and then that would have been carried on down. It's pretty easy, and there wouldn't be disagreement in philosophy, say, right now. But there is disagreement, and that's a fact. Even today, there's disagreement, and I want to talk about why that's good from my perspective later. But from Descartes, it was a scandal that there would be disagreement, even in his time. You know, with all these smart people around, they knew Latin, Greek, Hebrew, they knew logic, supposedly, and they had disagreement on the most fundamental questions about reality. So you could have taken the step of Montaigne. So you first take a step that I would take, that would be to embrace it. Embrace disagreement, that's a good thing. Or reject disagreement. Disagreement's a bad thing. So when you reject it, you take the position of Montaigne that would say, well, you know, the reason you have to reject philosophy, you have to reject disagreement, in this case reject philosophy, because there's only opinion in philosophy. There's no truth. You can't arrive at truth. It's only about opinion. Whereas, say, in the hard sciences, like physical sciences, there's truth in that, because there's not real disagreement today, he would say. Whereas Descartes would say, no. There is truth. You can find truth in philosophy. It's not impossible the way Montaigne thinks it's impossible. In fact, it's easy. The only thing you have to do is come up with good first principles. It's their first principles where they went wrong. And he saw rightly that everything depends on first principles. So, but he saw wrongly that because they disagreed on first principles, in my opinion, because they disagreed on first principles, that they must have been wrong about first principles. Argument I gave you earlier. If they would have been true, they would have been convincing to everybody, but they're not convincing to everybody. Therefore, their first principles were not true. So let's come up with new first principles, and that's where he starts his discourses on method and comes up with the new philosophy, say, which we'll talk about, I hope, in the next video. But right now, what I want to talk to you about is disagreements in general. So we're going to talk about disagreements and the first disagreements and why there would be disagreements in those first disagreements, okay? So a disagreement, we do it all the time. You know, I think X, you think Y. I can't believe you would say that. I just can't believe you would say that. And I can't believe you would say that. Why do we can't even argue it, we can't even discuss it. Oftentimes it's because there's a prior disagreement. There's a disagreement that comes first that we're going to talk about in a bit. Okay, so on a particular disagreement, it's not a big deal. Should we have pizza tonight? No, let's not have pizza. Let's have a big vegetable salad. And why? Because it's good to eat healthy. No, but it's good that your food tastes good. Besides, we have beer, and pizza's great with beer. Okay, that's a very particular disagreement. But then there's general disagreements that everybody has opinion about. And for example, say human cloning, hoy en día, today, should there be human cloning? And there's lots of disagreement about that. And some people would say, of course, there should be human cloning. You crazy? We can do it, then we should do it. And other people would say, absolutely not, there shouldn't be human cloning, because human being is sacred, and you can't be doing stuff like that. Okay, and so those kinds of disagreements, those more general disagreements, my argument is that those usually depend on prior disagreements. By the way, I want to give a shout out, as I always do, to Michael Lagros, professor at Thomas Aquinas College. He was a senior there at Thomas Aquinas College when I was a freshman, and like I said earlier, he went on to really do philosophy, and he's one of the best out there in my opinion right now. So I read an article by him called like Where Philosophers Disagree, or Disagreement in Philosophy. I don't remember the name of it. Here, let me look at it real quick, see if I can get the name of it. I'll do that later. The types of disagreements in general, that's what I want to talk about now, because we want to get to the point of saying, why are there fundamental disagreements, and in what areas are there fundamental disagreements, okay? So let's talk about in philosophical realms. Now, for this argument, I want to use the word philosophy to talk about life of the mind in general, okay? So philosophy, particularly, theology, mathematics, Euclid, maybe, arithmetic, say, mathematical science, maybe, musical theory, any of the 7 liberal arts, history and literature, read in a critical way. What is Shakespeare saying here? Josephus, what's his name? Josephus, why would he be saying these things about the Romans and the Jews? So that's what I'm talking about, the life of the mind in general. In that realm, for example, we're going to talk about the 3 ways of disagreeing, or the 3 areas of disagreeing, but let's talk about the life of the mind in general. Just want to give you some examples. Whether God's existence is demonstrable, whether you can prove that God exists. That's certainly a general question, and people have opinions on it. Some people don't think that, some people do think that. And a lot of that, I know you're not going to understand this right now, but a lot of that depends finally on a really fundamental principle, and that is your definition of motion, okay? Once, and Aristotle will prove, I think, in physics, that he'll start off coming to the definition of motion, and he'll prove the existence of God using the definition of motion. So whether you think God's existence is demonstrable, that it can be proven or not just taken by faith, okay, that's what I mean by proven, that you can see with your reason. You know how you see with your reason that the exterior angle of the triangle is equal to the opposite in interior angles, and the 3 interior angles of a triangle are equal to 2 right angles. You see that with your reason. You can see with your reason that there is a God. You prove that there is a God, and Aristotle does that. Some people would say, that's crazy, I can't believe you would say that. It's because you're Catholic or you're Christian and all you do is think, and you're not smart like I am. And we have that disagreement because we have a prior disagreement. And that prior disagreement is here, finally at a fundamental level, and a definition. And that definition would be, what is your definition of motion? What do you think about change in general? Change with trees growing, with fish swimming, with decay, okay, with substantial change, a seed and an egg becoming a human being, that kind of change. Well, how would you define that? It's interesting, we'll talk about it later, but Descartes is going to say it's too easy. You don't change in vectors motion, that's easy, you don't need a definition for that. Whereas the early philosophers, that's what they talked about. They at least thought everything was water and just came to be more and more condensed. Democritus, I think, I have to review it, but I think he thought that there were 4 smallest little particles and they just change around a lot. You get more and less in different positions. Okay, so then another one might be, say, whether the soul is immortal, the human soul is immortal. That's a big question, and a lot of people have different opinions on that. Some people think when you die, that's it, it's over. And other people think when you die, your soul continues. And some people know that by faith, say, because that's given to you by faith, and we're going to talk about that in a later video, why that's really cool. And some people see that, I think, with their intellect. And that kind of person is going to argue with a person who says, no, when you die, that's it, everything's gone. And if the other person says, no, the soul continues. Oh, I see, you hold that by your religion. No, I see it with my intellect. Oh, come on, I can't believe you would say that, somebody might say, which they do. And you say, well, look, in order for us to get there, we got to start talking about a really fundamental thing, okay? You talk about what life is, and are trees alive, are fish alive, is a rock not alive, what do you mean by life and death? But then later you talk about what you mean by the principle of life, okay, and that would be the soul. I don't want to scandalize you, but you talk about the soul of a tree, the soul of an animal, and the soul of a human being, a principle of life. Once you kind of wrestle around with that, because we're going to disagree on that. If we talk about that tomorrow, you're going to say, no, I don't think trees have a soul. And you say, okay, we have to discuss that. And then if we were to arrive at a definition of a principle of life, soul, then it would be easier for us to come to see we still have to do a lot of study and other kinds of arguments. But we still have to do a lot of study to come to an agreement on that, whether the man's soul is immortal. Okay? So that's enough for now. In the next video, I'm going to talk about the 3 different areas of first principles. So we established right now, I think, that the most interesting and the most general kinds of disagreements happen because there's prior agreements, and people disagree on arguments that depend on that argument. Okay, a fundamental thing like your knowledge of that the exterior angle of a triangle, that the interior angles of a triangle equal to 2 right angles. That depends on your knowledge of an exterior angle of a triangle, and that depends on your knowledge of the triangle's existence, say. So likewise, whether the soul is immortal, the human soul is immortal, finally depends, there's all kinds of things it depends on, but it really first depends on your definition of a soul. And we're going to disagree on that today if we discussed it, and we might fight about it, come to an agreement. But once we come to an agreement, then we can move on, okay? So there's really not much sense in discussing this if you can't discuss this. Okay, so what you'll find that I'm going to end here, the mother's asked me to end. So we'll talk about first principles in general. There's going to be three different kinds of first principles. And then we'll talk about agreement and disagreement in those 3 areas, okay? So, see you later. Bye.